All right. Good morning. Apologize for the delay. A bit of a cluster here on my end. Bear with me one moment. Still getting set up. Having password problems this morning, and those of you who know me know I'm not the most organized guy in the world. And I've always relied on Jennifer Elliott, who has either had a baby or will soon be having a baby. I'm not sure, but she's busy, and so I wasn't able to get a hold of Jennifer when a password, which has always been saved in here, and you just hit enter and it goes. When I tried to log in 15 minutes ago, it was gone. So moment of panic there. And while I was waiting for her to maybe get back to me and save my butt, I decided to log in again, which I figured was a complete waste of time because I'd already tried that. And this time, through the magic of computer technology, when I opened it up, there was the save password, like it's always been every other time I've done it, but it wasn't there 10 minutes ago. So you can ask me any agronomy questions you want. I will do my best to answer them. Do not ask me any IT related questions because that's a different show, different host, not me. So, good morning, everyone. I've got Heather Freebaron, virtual producer this morning. So Heather's in her home office in Kickapoo, I believe, and she is manning or womaning the chat. I guess it would be more appropriate to say, and she will help us along here. Although she wasn't any help to me this morning because she also doesn't know Jennifer's password. So note to Heather and I, we need to get Jennifer's password and save that somewhere so that if this happens again, I don't have to bother the lady having a baby to get a password. So anyway, lots going on. Been a lot of questions in the last few weeks about all the planting progress that's been going on. A lot of probably as much March planting has occurred as maybe ever in the state of Illinois. Some places it's pretty easy to find a lot of planted acres. Other places nobody's really ventured out with a planter yet, but we've had great conditions for whatever you wanted to do in the spring, whether that be planting, putting on anhydrous, putting on fertilizer. Not great conditions for spray and burn down because there's been a lot of days with 40-mile-an-hour winds and a lot of days where it was probably a little colder than you would like to have for good burn down efficacy. But we've really lots of talk about how dry it's been. We did just get some moisture, and I would ask you to put it in the chat for those of you who are on live. How much rain did you get yesterday? We had about a short inch on most of our farms here around home. I think my high was 1.4, and that went down to like 7/10, but most of them were 8, 9/10 to an inch. That's about what we got here at the research farm at Monmouth. And I know there were local areas with heavier amounts. At times, it seemed like it was going to amount to more than that. But the heavy periods of rain tended not to last very long. It was moving pretty fast, and kind of been the pattern here this year so far. Not as much as forecasted. So I have not kept up with how horrible things have been for the folks in Kentucky and Southern Illinois up the Ohio River Valley, where it was supposed to be just ferociously bad, serious tornadoes and 12 to 15 inches of rain. And I hope their weather forecast was overblown as well. But the chances of severe weather and major historic type flooding in that area of Kentucky and Southern Illinois and Southern Indiana up the Ohio River. Craig, thank you. 6/10 of Monticello. So once again, Central Illinois weather report of a less than impressive amount of rain. So. Not going to take long before field conditions are ideal again, as dry as we were with an inch of rain as we get some heat. So Who knows what's yet to come? We do have crop in the ground. I actually have a picture I'll pull up on my phone of crop in the ground. So I'll give kudos to. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what we do at our focus sites, but I'm going to give kudos to our staff at the Roanoke and Warrensburg focus sites for already having a couple planting dates in the ground on soybean planting date studies and corn planting date studies. And I've got a picture here on my phone. I'm sorry, apologize. I'm sending a text to Jennifer's dad to let him know that I got in here and he doesn't need to be trying to get a hold of his lovely daughter to save my butt here on Ask the Agronomist. But anyway, good, not very good TV here for you at the moment. But let's see, where did that picture go? So the beans I'm going to show you a picture of were planted March 14th, which was the first planting date at the Warrensburg site. Warrensburg would be kind of in the Decatur area for those who don't know. And there's actually growth occurring. So those soybeans, now you can see there's uneven growth occurring. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But that picture was taken about 3 days ago. And those beans had been in the ground for a little over 2 weeks at that time. And, in that 2-week stretch, because that's going back 3 weeks ago. So remember, that's in March 14th. We had some 80-degree days between March 14th and now. We haven't had an 80-degree day for a while. So a lot of the growth that you're seeing there happened, way back when we had soil conditions that are a lot warmer than what we have now. And is often the case, sometimes those really early planting windows that seem a little bit crazy to people, they catch a few warm days that some of us who don't start that early, who wait for the early birds to go and then we go, well, we miss the 3 warm days. And so our stuff takes longer to come up than theirs does, even though we planted it later. But the unevenness in growth between these two beans, when you're getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, less than 5 heat units a day, growth is occurring so slowly. And that seed that's got a little bit deeper taproot was probably in a spot that was just incrementally warmer than the other one, maybe by tenths of a degree for a few hours, difference. But small differences create differences in emergence uniformity, because no two seeds in that field are in exactly the same environment. And that's something I'm going to harp on a little bit here this morning. We spend a lot of time we've had a lot of conversations here on Ask the Agronomist, and I get questions from growers that they go to a meeting and they hear Alex Harrell or Randy Dowdy or David Hula speak at a meeting talking about how vital and critical it is to have your planter set up just right, how vital and critical it is to get just absolutely perfect uniform emergence. Well, you cannot possibly get perfect uniform emergence when it's going to take your crop 3, 4, 5 weeks to come up because it's growing so slowly. That's one of the advantages that, it's not a coincidence that these guys that talk about, early planting and perfect uniform emergence can plant early into 60-degree soils. When you can plant seeds in February and March and they're up in 4 or 5 days, that's a luxury we don't have here. If you're going to plant early, it's going to struggle to come up. It's going to take weeks for that seed to come up when you plant as early as we like to start. And you can't possibly achieve perfect uniformity from a plant that's going to come up over 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. So we have to make that decision. That's a trade-off decision we have to make. Do we want to wait for ideal soil conditions? No, normally that's probably not many years that we want to get started before everything is perfect. And so for everything to be perfect, you'd have to have the perfect temperature, the perfect forecast, the perfect soil moisture, the perfect soil conditions, and the perfect calendar date. And many times, one or more of those things you have to make some sacrifices on, because you're probably can't wait until all those stars align perfectly. You hope that a lot of those stars are aligned perfectly for a high percentage of your acres. But when you start, there's probably at least one or two of those stars that are a little bit out of alignment. Maybe you're a couple days early on soil conditions. Maybe the soil is 38 degrees. Maybe the weather forecast, doesn't look quite awesome, for the next 10 days after you plant. There's going to be something that's a little out of whack there. I mean, the soil temperature, nobody has, nobody's had a sustained 50-degree plus soil temperature for very long. Let's see. So I had a question here come in from Ross. Thank you, Ross. Does your depth recommendation on bean planting change based on calendar or soil temperature? Mine does not. Now everybody's got their own different opinion on that. And I would say this, and this is probably why you're asking, Ross. If you're going to plant beans in March, one of the worst things that could happen is they come up in a week. Because if they come up in a week, they're probably going to get enough growth to them. And then we're probably going to get a hard enough freeze that they're potentially going to be ruined by a freeze. And that's actually what frequently, most often, very rarely does a March planted soybean fail to emerge. What generally gets March planted soybeans is we get enough of a freeze that they get damaged so badly that somebody can't stand to wait and see if they're going to recover or not, and they get replanted from a freeze. So that almost always come up. It's just a question of, well, what happens to them after they come up? Because if you've got beans up April 1st, there's a good chance that sometime in their lifetime, they're going to encounter a sub 28-degree night, and you're possibly going to kill those soybeans. So I think where Ross was going with his question, I have heard the recommendation, if you're going to plant really early, maybe you should plant deeper to make sure they don't come up too fast. I don't like that approach myself. If you're intentionally planting them deeper so that they don't come up too fast, it would be far better to just wait to plant them and plant them at the appropriate 1.5 to 2 inch planting depth, whatever you like for soybeans. Now, if your typical planting depth on soybeans is 1 inch, which I would say is too shallow, then you should deepen them up anyway. But I don't like second guessing Mother Nature, because I'm going to be wrong more than I'm going to be right. And when you do something intentionally, thinking you're going to outguess Mother Nature, and then she doubles back on you and teaches you a lesson, that makes you feel about this tall. So I just like to be consistent. If you like to plant soybeans 1.5 inches deep, I'm okay with that. And I would plant your soybeans 1.5 inches deep. Now, you can vary planting depth in soybeans based on moisture, more than you can corn. Soybeans probably don't suffer quite as much from shallow planting as corn does. But, if you've got plenty of moisture, and you're not worried about that furrow drying out, what can sometimes happen with soybeans is that furrow will dry out. You have plenty of moisture when you plant, but 2 days later, after that seed has swollen and started to germinate and initiated the germination process, and that soil dries out at that point, it's fairly easy to kill that seed from desiccation. So you have to make sure that you're going to maintain enough moisture, where that seed's at in furrow, to get that seed germinated, get it going, get that taproot coming, and be able to keep that process going so it doesn't dry out. So, long-winded answer to your question, Ross, I would say no. I would not alter my planting depth based on planting date. I would recommend a good, healthy depth of 1.5 inches or more. There are some of the high yield gurus that are doing a lot of things with plant growth regulators in furrow, and doing a lot of things with biological products in furrow that are stimulating the energy of that plant, to germinate from a greater depth, that believe that there is a yield benefit to deeper planting in soybeans. But you can't just sock your beans in the ground 3 inches deep, regardless of soil temperature, regardless of soil conditions, and regardless of whether or not you know what the right PGRs are to put in the furrow to help it emerge from such a depth. So I'm going to say, somewhere in that 1.5 to 2 inch range is a good place for us to be on soybeans. And, it's going to take stuff that's in the ground now, a good amount of time. We'll talk about a new tool that we have that we're starting to share with customers and share with dealers. It's our emergence risk forecasting tool. And what that tool does is it's built for corn and cotton. We don't have one for soybeans at this time. Not sure we even have intentions of making one for soybeans, but this one that I'm going to talk about is built for corn. You give it a location, you give it a planting date, and based on current temperatures and forecasted temperatures, it's going to predict how many days it will take for that crop to emerge. Now, we're assuming you're going to plant it at the proper depth. We're assuming you're not going to try to cheat the system by planting your corn too shallow. That's a pet peeve of mine. A lot of guys that like to plant corn super early, earlier than I would like. They believe that the secret to that success, their success in doing that, is to plant the corn really shallow, because then it doesn't have to work so hard to get out of the ground. I like to tell people, if you think it's too early or too cold or too wet or too something to plant corn at least 2 inches deep, then don't plant it. If you think, well, if I shallow it up to 1.5 inches, that's going to help it get out of the ground faster. It will help it get out of the ground faster, but it's also going to suffer more temperature fluctuations. And we have had years with freezing temperatures where shallow planted corn has died and corn planted at the proper depth has not died. We also have a lot of situations where, especially when we're dry, which we've been dry, we don't have an adequate amount of moisture at that 1.5 inch depth to keep that seed in moisture. And so you get very uneven emergence, which we've talked about, how important that is. That uneven emergence thing is, people get really, really, really wrapped around the axle talking about that in December and January and February, when they're listening to smart people talk about how to raise 200 bushel beans and 600 bushel corn. And then when it comes time to go to the field, we kind of forget about all that stuff in our fervor to get out there and get going. And, if you're one of those guys that gets caught up in the fervor of getting out there and getting going, well, then don't waste a whole lot of energy worried about, perfect uniform emergence, because you can't have both. You can't be the first guy planting and the guy with the best emergence. You got to pick your battles. And, there's certainly a good amount of data been generated in the last 10 years, some of it by us. I think this planting date trial I'll use the board here behind me. That's not the board, that's the screen. That would be, you get asked not to come back to the learning center if you start writing on their screen instead of the board. But I mentioned to you the planting date study that has started. And so I'm going to draw a curve, and you can guess what that curve is going to represent. So here is March 14th. And let's say this is May 15th. So that's 60 days there, if my math is right. So if it feels to you like planting season lasts a lot longer than it used to, it's because it starts 1.5 months earlier than it used to. So what a lot of soybean planting date studies will show is that March planted soybeans are very, very, very rarely the highest yielding beans in any planting date study. Normally, the highest yields will come somewhere between April 5th and April 25th, let's say. But while April beans typically are better than March beans, crazy early March beans are generally better than mid-May beans. And that's kind of mind-blowing to think about. Something that you know, 20 years ago, nobody would have ever thought of doing in central Illinois. And here's what everybody was doing in central Illinois. But this is generally better than that. But the sweet spot is somewhere in between. And the argument that gets used to support this is that, well, if I start in the sweet spot, I'm going to finish over here somewhere. If I start ahead of the sweet spot, hopefully a lot of my acres get planted in the sweet spot, and I've got nothing being planted over here. And that's a good logic to use for soybeans. Is not a good logic to use for corn, because the corn yield curve doesn't look the same as the soybean yield curve when it comes to planting date. The corn yield curve, honestly, looks more like that, where it just gradually keeps getting better, and then it stays at the peak for, you know, probably I'm going to say the front side of this peak would be April 20 through May, let's say 5th. And then we start to decline. Now, there's been years where this curve was flat clear out to May 20th. But that's not normal. But there isn't really any data to support that, you know, late March corn is going to consistently outperform corn that gets planted later than that, unless you get way late in May or even into June. So the shape of the curves is different, and primarily because of crown rot, which is often what messes with the really early planted corn. And a year like last year, where we had very low crown rot pressure, we had some late March planted corn that was excellent. We had some very early April planted corn that was excellent. You know, we've talked a lot about what happened to some of the corn that got planted a little bit later. You know, those of us who like to be patient, who don't like to push it, who are worried about crown rot and trying to manage, you know, emergence risk and trying to manage crown rot risk. And we like to talk about being patient when it comes to planting corn. You know, that didn't work out great for some guys last year. And some people were kind of upset that they didn't push it harder earlier, because in some areas there was a, you know, I'd say a 20 or 30 bushel average advantage for corn that was planted early versus corn that was planted what I would call timely. But, you know, everybody's definition of timely and early varies. But let's get back to that emergence risk forecasting tool that I mentioned. And I'm going to start sharing reports from this out to my FSRs. And so you might start to see this show up in your inbox. But what the tool is going to generate is something that looks like that. And what that chart is showing is 3 different planting dates and how many days it's going to take each of those planting dates, in theory, to emerge. Now, as I said, this is built based on air temperature. It will report soil temperature at 2-inch depths, but we are using air temperature for the GDU calculation. And the air temperature is, if the day has already happened, the air temperature is actual temperature data. If it's looking ahead for the next 4 or 5 days, that air temperature is from the weather forecast, which you know how perfect those are. If you get further out than a week, we have actually studied this, and we have determined that using a historical average temperature for where you're at is actually more accurate than using the weather forecast. So we're using a combination of real temperatures, forecasted temperatures, and historical average temperatures to predict how many days is it going to take for that seed based on where you're at, based on when you planted it, to come up. Now, the other thing we do is, you'll see tables like this where it's showing you, so the cells over here highlighted in blue, those are nights with a forecasted low temperature or an actual low temperature of 32 degrees or cooler. So it's calling those out. The dark red bars, or the dark red cells here, are days with, I think, less than 2.5 heat units accumulated. And, you can look on here and some of these planting dates, there's a lot of days where the forecast is for 0 heat units to accumulate. It takes about 110 to 120, depending on the hybrid and depending on a few other factors, but about 110 to 120 heat units to get the seed out of the ground. And if you've ever tracked 2-inch soil temperatures, there's a lot of people ask, well, why are you using air temperature? Because the seed's not in the air, the seed's in the soil. Well, if you track 2-inch soil soil depth temperature, it varies almost as much as air temperature does. And it's not significantly different than air temperature, typically, as far as heat unit accumulation. And honestly, everything's just always been based on air. I'm not aware of anybody. There's probably somebody who's done a study. Maybe some of you have seen one where somebody actually tracked air temperature, GDU accumulation, and soil temperature, GDU accumulation, to see, in which one is 110 to 120 the right number. The 110 to 120 recommendation that you hear from people, that's how many heat units it takes to get corn emerged, that's based on air temperature GDUs. I don't know if anybody's ever actually done a study. I'm sure somebody has, to track the soil temperature based GDUs. And then if you're going to do that, do you use 4-inch depth, which is kind of the standard depth for reporting? Some places report 2 inches. Farmers would say, well, 2 inches is more relevant than 4 because I don't plant 4 inches deep, I plant 2 inches deep. Well, that 2-inch soil temperature fluctuates a lot more than the 4-inch does. So 2 inches, it gets, on a dark, bare soil at 2 inches deep on a bright, sunny day, the soil might be warmer than the air in some cases. The soil is going to warm up slower than the air in the morning, but it's going to cool down slower than the air in the evening. And so when you track it over a 24-hour period, the difference in heat unit accumulation between 2-inch deep soil and the air is probably negligible. But so basically the way we have the way we have kind of broken this out, so the color coding would be: red would be from 0 to 2 heat units accumulated per day. We call that a really bad day for a seed to be in the ground. So that's a high risk day. A medium high risk day is between 2 and 5 heat units accumulated per day. And at, so if it takes 120 at 5 per day, what's that going to be? 24 days, that seed's going to be in the ground before it comes up. And that's at 5 per day. If you got days where you're getting 0, those don't even count. Then a medium risk day is a day where you're getting 5 to 10 heat units per day. And at that rate, that seed's going to come up, within a fairly reasonable amount of time. And then a low risk day or a good day is 10 plus heat units per day. And on a really hot day in the summertime, we'll get 25 to 30 heat units. So, 10 plus is not exactly hot weather, but at 10 plus, your corn's going to be up in 10, 11, 12 days. And so what we consider to be, low risk, um, would be planting dates that enable the seed to come up in 12 days or less. Medium risk would be like 12 to 17, 18 days to emerge. And high risk would be any planting date that basically the tool would say it's going to be at least 18 days or more before that seed emerges. And the longer it takes for the seed to get out of the ground, and you guys know this, the more chance is something bad's going to happen to it. And certainly the greater the chance is that it's going to get uneven, and you're going to have more plant to plant competition. And we talked about this earlier. I mean, people spend a lot of time talking about, oh, I want uniform emergence. I want uniform emergence. I want every plant in the field to be up in the same 24-hour window, or at least the same 48-hour window. And then we plant it into a soil with a weather forecast that says it's going to take it 26 days to come up. And if it takes your corn 26 days to come up, there's no way you're getting every seed in that field up within the same 48-hour window. So that's where you got to kind of, pick your poison, make your decisions. Are you going to sacrifice some uniformity going after earlier planting? How many acres do you have to get done? How many good days do you need to plant your crop? Most of us, if we're honest, are equipped well enough that if we had a good week of running with good weather and minimal breakdowns, and everybody showed up for work that day, and nobody was hungover and nobody was sick and everything went well, a lot of growers could plant the vast majority of their acres in a week. Almost all of us could have them all done in 2 weeks. It's just a question of, well, how many calendar days is it going to take for us in a normal spring? You're going to have days it's too wet. You're going to have days it's too this, it's too that. You're going to have breakdowns. You're going to have delays. You're going to have stuff happen. So it's going to take more actual days than it does calendar days to get that planted. So question come in from Todd. How much will this vary by tillage practice? It varies a lot. Varies a lot by soil type. The darker soils, once again, those of you who had a grandfather or a father, or maybe it was even some of you that shelled out the moolah for the black soil, the darker the soil, the warmer it will be, the faster it warms up, and the more you can push it. If you're a timber soil farmer like me, that soil that's about the color of this paper or that board behind me, it does not warm up as fast, and there's nothing you can do to make it absorb solar energy like black soil. So you can till it, you can vertical till it, you can bury the residue, you could burn it off if you wanted to. Those things will all make it warm up quicker, but you can't make it warm up as quick as the stuff that's just a naturally dark soil. So soil moisture makes a difference because it takes more energy to warm up water than it does air. So the more moisture you have in a soil, the harder it is for it to warm up. The darker a soil is, the faster it warms up. The less residue you have on a soil, the faster it warms up. And in your strip, in a strip till environment, that strip, is going to act more like tilled soil because it's generally clean and it has been disturbed. But the 80% of the soil space between the strips is basically like traditional no-till. So if you graph it out, you've got no-till would be your coldest. Strip till would generally be your second coldest. reduced tillage would be next, and then we'll just call it plow. So full buried, no residue, and here would be your temperature curve. Not really a curve; it's just kind of a straight line. So the more soil you expose, and the darker the soil is, and the drier the soil is, the warmer it's going to be. So what is the wettest, least exposed soil on this chart? It'd be down here. And what is the driest, most exposed soil on this chart would be over here. And based on the moisture level and the amount of exposure is what's going to determine, where the warmest soil is. So the strip is going to be closer to the temperature of a full tilled field than a no-till field will be. But because in between the warm strips, you've got a bunch of chilly, cold soil, just like you do here, that's actually influencing the temperature that the strip gets to as well. So, and sometimes if you've done some tillage, but you've got a ton of residue, you might actually be able to flip-flop these two. So if your strip is perfectly clean, and over here, even though you've done some tillage, so maybe the between the row is warmer over here, but right in the row, you've still got some residue that's reflecting sunlight, that's not warming up as fast because you didn't remove all the residue right where the row is going to be. You could actually get strip till in the strip to be warmer than reduced till would be, across the field average. You're not going to get strip till to be warmer than a full tilled field typically, but you might get it warmer than heavy residue reduced tillage. Okay, so I think that answered that question, hopefully. So go back to kind of jumping around here a little bit, which is what I do. I think that makes it more interesting. You might use a different adjective, like maybe frustrating would be the adjective you would choose. But I want to give a little bit of a shout out to our TD sites. I mentioned their planting date work, that they've already got stuff in the ground, and that's great. What we challenge those guys to do is, hey, every time a farmer asks us what would happen if I did this, or what happens when I do this, or should I do this, or should I do that, our goal is to actually have some real research-based data to answer that question. And that's a lot of what our TD group is charged with doing. So at these sites, there's 4 main sites in Illinois. So we're at Rochelle, Roanoke, Warrensburg, and Irvington, I believe, is the one that's down south. And then there's some other satellite locations that they do work at, but maybe not quite as much work as they do at the 4 major sites. And the kind of stuff they're doing there, they're doing work with new herbicides like Conventro. They're testing products that aren't available yet on the market, but they're close to the market. They've been looking at HT4 soybeans, now known as Viconic soybeans, for the past couple years at these sites. They can do work with regulated products there that have not been approved yet. They can do crop destruct trials there on products that have not been approved yet. They can do a lot of new weed control systems work. So, for example, you might think that the 5 different mode of actions of herbicides that Viconic soybeans are going to be resistant to, which we've talked about this before. So the 5 resistance mechanisms you're going to have, or the 5 products, you're going to have Roundup, you're going to have Liberty, you're going to have dicamba, you have 2,4-D, and something called mesotrione. So that would be the HPPD. And then you got 2 growth regulators. and then we all know Roundup and Liberty. So you haven't been able to use mesotrione combined with Liberty in soybeans before. And you might be using HPPD, maybe you've been using HPPDs for years in corn, and you're seeing them fall off in efficacy. You're seeing them not work as good as they did 5 years ago, and that's all true. There is resistance in water hemp to every product on this list. But luckily for us, we haven't identified one yet that's resistant to all 5 things on that list. We're in the process of getting there, so that's why we're still trying to develop other new things like Conventro and other new modes of action to hopefully stay at least half a step ahead of Mother Nature. But the ability to use all of these things in a system, we need to do a lot of work to determine, well, if you've got all these options, what's the best weed control system for Viconic soybeans? And so a lot of that work is done at these focus sites. And the other nice thing about the focus sites is we can do training there, we can do touring there, we can bring farmer groups in, we can bring our dealers in, we can bring our own internal people in, and Heather's asking a rhetorical question. So Heather's asking, what is Conventro? So Conventro is a new herbicide. It is a testing myself here, group 12, right, Heather? I believe. Confirm that in the chat. I believe it's a group 12. So group 12s are not new, but there are not many group 12s on the market, and this particular molecule has never been sold in North America. It's actually sold in Europe, so it's a Bayer active ingredient. It's not a new mode of action, but it is a new mode of action against water hemp in North America, and so that is a new pre-emergent soil applied. Yes, group 12. Thank you, Heather. Pre-emergent soil applied, has crop safety in corn and soybeans, and it's basically good on 2 weeds. And I've joked before, in the early days of my career, we had a product called halosulfuron. We called it Permit. And then we came out with a product that was premixed with dicamba, with Permit and dicamba, called Yukon. You may remember using that product in corn. It wasn't used in corn very long because that product controlled until we put dicamba with it, that broadened the spectrum out significantly. Permit by itself was really good on 4 weeds. It was good on velvet leaf. It was good on cocklebur. It was good on sunflower. And uniquely, it was good on yellow nutsedge. We did not have a tremendous amount of commercial success with a product that only killed 4 weeds, even though those 4 weeds were, important weeds. When you've got products that control 10 weeds or 20 weeds, Roundup in its day controlled 200 and some weeds, still does. Sometimes people act like it doesn't kill anything anymore, but that's not true. It just doesn't kill water hemp anymore. So that brings me to why Conventro could be a very successful product with a very limited weed spectrum. It is an Amaranthus species specialist. And what is Amaranthus species? Those are pigweeds. What are the 2 worst pigweeds in the world? Water hemp and Palmer amaranth. And Conventro is very good on water hemp and Palmer amaranth. Now, it's going to be used in combination with other products. You're not going to use it by itself because you got other weeds that you need to kill. And we've learned the hard way from water hemp, you can't rely on one product to control water hemp. But it will be another thing you can add to this list that could be used in a Viconic soybean system. It could be used in any soybean because the soybean does not have to be made to be resistant to Conventro. But that's what Conventro is, and that product will be out hopefully soon, but it's not ready to go quite yet. But there'll be, if you go to a focus site to a tour this summer, and you're listening to Ted or Cody or any of our chemistry folks walk through plots and tell you what their treatments are and tell you what they're doing in this plot, you will see and hear about Conventro. So, Heather, hopefully that answers your question. Our producer doubles as a crop protection FSR, so she wanted to get a good plug in there for Conventro, which is good. So other work that we're doing at the focus sites. So they're looking at new traits. So we've got new traits coming out for corn rootworm and other pests. Insects are no different than diseases. They are constantly overcoming what we're using to control them. And so even though we just launched SmartStax Pro with the new RNAi trait just a couple years ago, the next generation of corn rootworm resistance, which we call corn rootworm 4. You know how clever we are with what we call things when they're in research. We haven't come up with the SmartStax Pro Super Duper or whatever the commercial trade name will be for corn rootworm 4, but those products are already in development, and we've got our true reach. So I'm setting at Monmouth. So Monmouth is actually a step ahead or behind, however you want to say it. They're working with the stuff that's maybe 10 years from getting into your hot little hands on your farm. The guys that are working at Roanoke and Warrensburg at the focus sites, they're working with products that are maybe a couple years away from commercial sales as well as commercial products. And then the flunkies like me, we're just working with the stuff that's available today, typically. So they do a lot of systems work at the focus site. So, Preceon or short corn, that's a new way of raising corn. That's a new system. We're doing our groundbreakers, but before we had groundbreakers, we were doing systems trials with Preceon. Didn't call it Preceon at that time. We called it short corn. That was before smart corn, which was before Preceon. So, you can determine for yourself whether those names are getting better or not as they go. That type of work is what they're doing at the focus sites, and we also, they're set up, generally to do tours in the summertime. So if you're curious what's going on there, talk to your FSR. We'll have some dates coming up this summer where we'll have customer tours there. Sometimes we do private tours for some of our dealers. We do a lot of training events, internal events for ourselves, and something new that we want to start doing. We have a bit of a problem here at Bayer, and it's not a new problem. It was a Monsanto problem as well. We are very proud of the research that we do. We are very proud of how hard we work and how much we invest in research. We are not so proud of how good of a job we do telling you what we've done or showing off what we've done. So we have hopes. Sean Evans, who's our regional agronomy lead, is kind of leading this effort. Sean has a plan, a goal, a desire to get some publications coming out of these focus sites as far as, sharing with you the results of the trial work that we're doing there so that you don't have to physically go to the site to learn about what was done at the site. So knock on wood that we can pull that off. That's something that we've attempted to do in the past with sporadic success. But Sean is gifted and committed. So my guess is we'll actually manage to pull something off. And I think that's about all I had on my list. We might let things end a little bit early here today. We got a late start, but if anybody has a quick parting question before we go, please put it in the chat. And thanks for all the questions today, guys. This is great. It's I love it. I've shared this with you before. My goal when we started Ask the Agronomist 5 years ago already was someday to have 100 people plus watching it live. And I don't even have time to get to all the questions that come in on the chat. And we haven't quite found what the success, what the trick to that is. But those of you who do join live, I really appreciate you and appreciate your questions, appreciate your interaction. And we did get, I think the biggest weather rainfall total we had was an inch for Merle. That'd be in the Bloomington area. So I know one of my farms, kind of closer to Macomb, had an inch and 4/10. So I know there were some localized amounts that were heavier. And like I say, I haven't. My son sent me I showed a picture earlier. I'll see if I can show this one. This was a wall cloud. Can't remember where he told me this was. So this was. This was between Effingham and McLeansboro yesterday afternoon. And the picture doesn't do that justice, but I mean that looks an awful lot to me like a scene from Wizard of Oz. That is some scary sky. I don't know what those people got out of that. I don't know if that was a hailstorm or just heavy rain or tornado or what that was, but that looks mean. So there definitely was some weather a lot more severe than what we dealt with. So hopefully everyone stayed safe and is going to be able to recover quickly from that. We'll be back with you in 2 weeks. I don't know, Heather, if you got time to type that in the chat really quick, what the date for the next episode will be. And hopefully we won't have password problems and that sort of stuff, and we'll be on time. But we'll be back with you in 2 weeks. Hopefully we're planting has resumed by then and planting is rolling then. And as we go through the season, as is always the case, it will be revealed to us who made the right decisions on planting dates, and whether the people who are, there's a handful of guys out there that are good ways towards done on soybeans. There we go. April 17th. So April 17th will be our next Ask the Agronomist. Thank you, Heather, for that. And so hopefully we're in the thick of planting, and you're all so busy that nobody even shows up for that episode. But we'll see what the weather brings. And like I say, we'll if nobody has planted anything more by then, a lot of people are going to be wishing they would have pushed it harder earlier, but time will tell. A lot of times the best planting dates haven't even gotten here yet by April 17th. I had a neighbor that texted me a few days ago teasing me because he knew I didn't have any soybeans planted when he sent me this text. He says, are you planting beans today? And I said, no. I said, we're switching to corn today. It's getting late. So there's been a lot of people that the way they were rolling through soybeans, you would have thought it was May, but it was another month. It was March. So anyway, it'll be interesting to see how things turn out, as it always is. Stay safe. Thanks for joining, and we'll be with you again in 2 weeks. And thank you, Heather, for your help as well.